Hi everyone, welcome to another one of my 10-minute chess opening videos for the Semi-Slav defense, which is my preferred defense against the Queen's Gambit. So the Semi-Slav begins with the move pawn to d4, pawn to d5, pawn to c4, which is the Queen's Gambit, and in this position Black replies with the move pawn to e6. This leads to the Queen's Gambit declined, and in this position White plays the move knight to c3, Black replies with knight to f6, White plays the move knight to f3, and when Black pushes the move pawn to c6, we have the Semi-Slav defense. The Semi-Slav defense is an extremely powerful opening.
Semi-Slav maybe? It's a really good opening.
Where in the beginning of the game, Black is slightly caged in by his own pawns, but as the match progresses, Black lashes out by attacking on the queen side and trying to gain an initiative on that side of the board. Now in this position, after the Semi-Slav defense appears on the board, White has two main choices, and one of them is the move pawn to e3, and the other move that you will see very commonly is the move bishop all the way down to g5. Let's talk about the main line of the opening first, in which White goes with the move pawn to e3, and in this variation it's very important to establish what are the main ideas for Black over here and how Black should develop his pieces. We are looking at this opening from Black's perspective, so we are going to focus more on Black's development. Black's dark square bishop in this opening is usually going to be developed on this diagonal, where the most commonly it will end up either on b4, on e7, and sometimes also on d6. Black's queen will also be developed in a similar kind of manner on this diagonal, where the moves c7 and b6 are going to be the most common moves you will see. And the main reason behind why Black's queen has to be developed on this diagonal is because Black's knight is going to be developed on d7, which will cut off the queen's access to go down the file. Currently we have talked about the development of the Black knights, the dark square bishop and the queen. So let's talk about the other two pieces, which is the light square bishop and the rook on the a file, and how they have to be developed. We don't have to worry too much about the king and the rook on the h file because they're going to be castled and going to end up over in these two squares. So in order to understand the development of the light square bishop and the rook, let's play a few more moves in the main line, where Black continues with the move knight to d7. White plays the move bishop to d3, Black captures on c4, White captures back, and Black counters with the move pawn to b5. Now the opening, the Semi-Slav defense. The success and failure of this particular opening depends pretty much on how well Black is able to utilize his light square bishop. Most of the diagonals available to the bishop, which are these diagonals, are all being blocked in by Black's own pieces, and Black would have to move them in strategical ways so that the bishop can get activated and become powerful. In this position, the most common move you would see from White is the move bishop back to d3, where it was a move ago. Now in order to demonstrate how Black should develop his queenside pieces, it's good to play a few hypothetical moves. So let's play a few hypothetical moves. Pawn to a6, queen to c2, bishop to b7, White castles, Black moves the rook to c8, rook to e1, and pawn to c5. So this is an ideal setup for Black, and this is what you're looking forward to achieve when you're playing the Semi-Slav defense. Black is looking forward to pushing this move pawn to c5 to put pressure on White's center and also opening up the light square bishop. And in order to make this happen, we need to protect our b pawn, which is sitting right here. And how do you have to protect this pawn? By playing the move pawn to a6. And since the c file is ready to be opened up at any point, it is also very beneficial to have the rook staring down this file. Now in this position, when White went back to d3 with the bishop and Black pushed the move pawn to s6, White doesn't have to help you in achieving all those moves we just talked about. White could play the silent move, which is the move pawn to a3. And although on the surface this move looks harmless, but it's actually a pretty deadly move. If Black was to play a very slow move at this point, White could simply push the move pawn to b4, and now c5 is not possible anytime in the recent future because White could simply capture the pawn back and have a massive pawn chain in the queen side where Black was supposed to be winning. So if you do see the move a3 on the board, get ready to strike back with the move pawn to c5 because c5 is already sufficiently defended by the knight and the bishop. And in case you allow the move pawn to b4 on the board, get ready to strike back with moves like pawn to a5 and queen to b6 to take back the initiative. Now let's quickly go back to this position where black played the move knight to d7 and white replied with the move bishop to d3. Now white doesn't have to do that because once black captures back, white has to waste a move moving the bishop again, while the bishop could have arrived to this square directly instead of having to make a stop on d3. So white might be like, no, I don't want to waste a move, let's play queen to c3 and wait for black to capture the pawn, only then will I develop my bishop. So at this point, you don't have to capture the pawn, you can play the move bishop to d6. Now there are a few dangers lurking in this position. White can counter with the move pawn to g4, and this is not a silly gambit of a pawn because if you do capture this pawn, white can attack your knight and put pressure on the g7 pawn, and if you try to defend your knight, white can deflect your knight away with the move pawn to h3. The best way to counter this move is by playing the move pawn to h6 yourself, and if white still insists on pushing the move pawn to h4, then you can go ahead and capture this pawn, because now when the rook counters, you can defend your knight with the pawn and there's no more h-pawn for white to kick your knight away. It's gonna take some time for white to open up the king side now. Now those are just the variations that you must be aware of if white plays a move pawn to e3 in this position. But white could full well choose to play the move bishop all the way down to g5. Now there are three different variations that you should be aware of in this position, and the first variation is called the Cambridge Springs defense, where black plays the move knight to d7 and white is now free to push the pawn to e3, connecting the bishop and the pawn on c4. And from here, black would play the move queen to a5, and this is how this line progresses. Now there are a few things you need to be aware of in this particular variation, and that is black can build significant pressure on the knight on c3 because it's currently pinned to the white king, and moves like e4 with the knight and bishop to b4 become possible, building considerable pressure on the knight on c3. And white has sufficient defenders with moves like rook to c1, queen to c2 or queen to b3. But in the midst of all this pressure, you might sometimes see a move like knight back to d2 in order to unpin the knight on c3, and then moves like pawn capturing on c4 become possible, opening up an attack on the bishop on g5, which does not have a defender once the knight on c3 moves away. Yes, sometimes you may be able to capture that bishop sitting right there, completely free. The other variation that you need to be aware of is known as the orthodox defense, wherein you push the pawn to h6. White usually chooses to give up the dark square bishop at this point, and you want to capture with the queen. You don't want to destroy your pawn structure. You want to keep your pawns connected if at all possible. But in this variation, you don't need to make all that effort of capturing the pawn, pushing pawn to b5 to open up your light square bishop and putting it in this diagonal. There are some other ideas in this position wherein you can push the move pawn to e5 once you have sufficient defenders, which you can get by putting the bishop on d6, putting the knight on d7, pushing the move pawn to e5, and then the light square bishop can be developed on this diagonal. That's one change in plan you might have to make. But if you want to play highly tactical chess, where one mistake can cost you the game and play a crazy match altogether, in this position you can simply go ahead and capture the pawn on c4. This leads to some of the craziest lines of the Semi-Slav defense, wherein white is ready to push with the move pawn to e4, and white has complete control over the center. What you have in return is you're able to push the move pawn to b5 and continue to hold on to the pawn on c4, and you have a material advantage. But be aware that the move pawn to e5 is coming and your knight on f6 is about to get pinned. And if white chooses to take your knight on f6, there's not much you can do about it. You will lose that knight, but you will have sufficient compensation for that knight. A very common line could go somewhat like this: e5, countering the bishop with h6. Bishop goes back to h4, countering the bishop again, unpinning the knight in the process. But white says no, we won't let you unpin. Let's sacrifice over here, taking back the knight, and bishop captures the pawn. The knight is again pinned. White just gave up a knight and white will get that knight back. Black on the other hand has an initiative on the queen side and is able to make moves like pawn to a5, pawn to b4, and push pawns down on that side of the board and try to queen a pawn. Forget about castling in an opening like this is the excitement you play for. So that was my 10-minute intro into the Semi-Slav defense. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe to my channel. I will see you in another one of my videos, and have a safe day.